Dr. Evan Carter wiped the sweat from his brow as he huddled over his laptop, the dim light of the emergency generator barely illuminating the room. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the latest reports. The virus had spread to nearly every district of the city. Civilian casualties, unknown. Infected, increasing exponentially. Time until total containment via aerial bombardment, 72 hours. His breath came fast. 3 days. That was all he had. 3 days to escape with his research, the only hope of a cure. A sudden, distant explosion rattled the building. Evan flinched. The infected were moving closer. Their grotesque moans seeped through the cracked windows of the research facility. Outside, the streets were war zones, civilians torn apart, gunfire ringing out in short, desperate bursts before fading into silence. The city was already lost. His fingers flew across the keyboard, backing up the files onto a portable drive. He stuffed it into a waterproof case and tucked it into his lab coat pocket. If the military bombed the city, there would be nothing left. No survivors. No research. No chance. He had to get out. Evan turned to the door, pausing at the sound of muffled crying from down the hall. He hesitated. Everyone had evacuated hours ago, or worse. Slowly, he inched toward the source, gripping a rusted fire axe from the emergency kit. As he peered into the room, his heart clenched. A woman sat slumped against the cabinets, her paramedic uniform torn and stained with blood. She cradled a pistol in her lap, her breath ragged. Her red-rimmed eyes snapped up at him. "Who the hell are you?" "Dr. Carter," he said, lowering the axe slightly. "Virology department." "I thought everyone had evacuated." The woman scoffed. "You call this an evacuation?" She gestured to the darkened halls, the flickering emergency lights casting eerie shadows. "Name's Sarah. I stayed behind to help survivors." Not that it mattered. Evan studied her, noting the exhaustion in her features. "I need to get out of the city. There's a military checkpoint, but..." Sarah let out a hollow laugh. "Checkpoint's overrun. Soldiers pulled out hours ago. No one's getting out that way." His stomach dropped. "There has to be another way." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "There might be. But we'll need help. The streets are crawling with those things." Another explosion shook the ground, and a monstrous howl echoed from the streets. Evan's pulse pounded. Every second counted. Sarah stood, wincing as she loaded her pistol. "There's someone I know. Ex-military. If anyone can get us out, it's him." Evan nodded. "Where is he?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "A few blocks from here. Problem is, the dead are between us and him." Evan swallowed hard. 3 days. Less than that, really. Every second wasted was one closer to annihilation. "Then we better move now," he said. Sarah cracked a grim smile. "Welcome to hell, document." Together, they stepped into the darkness, the sounds of the infected closing in around them. The countdown had begun. Evan gripped the fire axe tightly as he and Sarah moved through the ruined streets, keeping close to the shadows. Fires raged in the distance, casting flickering light across the bodies littering the pavement. Some were fresh. Others, still moved. Sarah motioned for him to stop, pressing a finger to her lips. Ahead, a group of infected stumbled through the wreckage of a police blockade. Their heads jerked unnaturally, sniffing the air, searching. Evan's heart hammered. He turned to Sarah and whispered, "We go around?" She shook her head. "No time. We'll have to move fast and quiet. Follow me." She crept forward, stepping over broken glass and debris, her movements calculated. Evan followed, trying to match her pace. One wrong move, one noise, and they'd be dead before they could scream. Halfway through the wreckage, Evan's foot hit something soft. He looked down, his stomach twisted. A soldier's body, his rifle still clutched in death. The man's face was a gaping wound of torn flesh. The body twitched. Evan barely stifled a gasp as the soldier's eyes, clouded, lifeless, snapped open. It lunged. Sarah reacted first, firing a single shot into its skull. The gunshot echoed through the street like a thunderclap. The infected turned as one. "Run!" Sarah shouted. They sprinted through the chaos, weaving between abandoned cars and collapsed buildings. The creatures shrieked behind them, closing the distance fast. Up ahead, a chain-link fence blocked their path. Beyond it, a figure stood waiting, a man in tactical gear, rifle raised. "Jason!" Sarah yelled. The man's sharp gaze locked onto them. Without hesitation, he lifted his rifle and fired, dropping the first infected in pursuit. "Move," he barked. Sarah grabbed Evan's arm, practically throwing him toward the fence. Jason kicked open a side gate, motioning them through before slamming it shut. Evan collapsed against a dumpster, gasping for air. The infected slammed into the fence, their bloodied hands grasping, mouths snapping hungrily. Jason scowled. "Hell of a mess you brought me." Sarah ignored him, reloading her pistol. "We need to get out of the city. You're the only one who can help us." Jason glanced at Evan. "Who's the nerd?" Evan straightened, forcing himself to catch his breath. "Dr. Evan Carter. I have research, critical research. If I don't get it out of here before the military levels the city, we lose any chance of stopping this." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And why should I care?" Evan's hands clenched into fists. "Because in 70 hours, we're all dead." Jason studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Damn it." He looked at Sarah. "You really know how to pick 'em." Sarah smirked. "You in?" Jason glanced at the infected clawing at the fence. "Looks like I don't have a choice." Evan exhaled. One step closer. Now, they just had to survive. The trio moved swiftly through the shattered remains of the city, sticking to the alleyways to avoid the roaming hordes. The night air was thick with the stench of smoke and decay, and the distant crackle of gunfire echoed through the ruins. Jason led the way, his rifle at the ready. "We're heading to the underground research facility near the old subway tunnels. If there's a way out, it'll be there." Evan's stomach twisted. That was his facility. The place where the virus was studied. And where it might have originated. Sarah eyed him as they moved. "You look like you've seen a ghost, document." Evan hesitated. "That lab, it wasn't just for research." Jason gave him a sharp look. "What are you saying?" Evan swallowed hard. It was a level 4 biocontainment lab. The virus, this outbreak, it wasn't natural. It was engineered. Jason stopped dead in his tracks. "You knew about this?" Evan nodded, shame tightening his throat. "Not at first. I was brought in to help develop countermeasures, but something went wrong. A breach. The infection spread faster than we could control it." Sarah exhaled, rubbing her temple. "So this wasn't some random mutation. It was made." Jason cursed under his breath. "And now you want to waltz back into the lab where it all started?" "Brilliant." Evan stepped forward, urgency in his voice. "There are emergency escape routes. Underground tunnels that lead outside the quarantine zone. And there's something else, a prototype antiviral I was working on. It's not a full cure, but it slows the infection. It could save lives." Jason's jaw tightened. "And let me guess, it's locked away in some high-security vault?" Evan nodded. "Pretty much." Jason sighed. "Of course it is." A distant howl pierced the silence. The sound was different this time, deeper, more intelligent. Sarah tensed. That didn't sound like the others. Jason motioned for them to move. "Let's go." Now. They reached the entrance to the facility, a partially collapsed parking garage with a hidden access point beneath it. The keypad was still functional. Evan punched in the override code, and the steel door hissed open. Inside, the lab was eerily silent. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over the halls. Blood smeared the walls. Evan's hands shook as he moved toward the central vault. The samples should be in here. Jason and Sarah covered him as he accessed the biometric scanner. The door slid open, revealing racks of refrigerated vials. He grabbed the antiviral samples and stashed them in his bag. Then he noticed something else, an open terminal, files still displayed. He skimmed the documents. His blood ran cold. Project Thanatos. Phase 2 activation, pending. Sarah peered over his shoulder. What the hell is that? Evan's voice was barely a whisper. They weren't just making a virus. They were evolving it. Jason stepped forward. Meaning what? Evan turned to them, face pale. Meaning this isn't over. The virus is still changing. A sudden, inhuman screech echoed through the lab. Jason raised his rifle. I think we just ran out of time. From the darkness, something new was coming. The sound that echoed through the lab was wrong. It wasn't the guttural moan of the infected. It was sharper, more purposeful. Jason aimed his rifle toward the darkened corridor. Whatever's in here, it's not alone. Sarah yanked Evan away from the terminal. We need to move. Evan's hands trembled as he clutched the bag of antivirals. The truth he had just uncovered clawed at his mind. This wasn't just an outbreak. It was a test. And now, whatever was next, was here. A shadow shifted beyond the emergency lights. Then, it stepped into view. At first glance, it looked human, until it moved. Its skin was stretched too tight, its muscles rippling unnaturally beneath its flesh. Its eyes, clouded like the infected, locked onto them with chilling awareness. Then it smiled. Oh, hell no, Jason muttered. He squeezed the trigger. The creature dodged. It dodged. Sarah barely had time to react before it lunged. She fired 3 shots into its chest. It staggered back but didn't fall. Evan stumbled backward, his breath ragged. That's not a normal infected. It's... The creature roared and charged. Jason tackled Sarah out of the way as claws slashed through the air. Sparks flew as the creature's hand tore through the steel wall like it was paper. Evan scrambled, fumbling for anything, when his fingers brushed against a fire suppression panel. He slammed his fist against it. Gas erupted from the ceiling, blanketing the area in thick white mist. The creature screeched, thrashing wildly as it struggled to see. Jason didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sarah and Evan and ran. They sprinted through the lab, deeper into the underground tunnels. The echoes of the creature's enraged howls followed them. Please tell me that thing isn't following us, Sarah panted. Jason threw a glance over his shoulder. Oh, it's following. Evan's mind raced. It's not like the others. It's thinking. Jason gritted his teeth. Yeah? Well, let's hope it's not thinking too fast, 'cause we're getting the hell out of here. They reached the emergency tunnel access door. Evan swiped his keycard. The door didn't open. Come on, he muttered, trying again. A heavy thud sounded behind them. Jason and Sarah turned. The creature stood at the end of the corridor, its head tilted, watching them. Then, it took a step forward. Jason raised his rifle. Anytime now, document. Evan's fingers flew over the panel. Almost. The creature growled low in its throat. Then it spoke. Run. Evan's blood turned to ice. The door clicked open. They didn't hesitate. They dove through, slamming it shut behind them. Sarah gasped for air. Tell me I didn't just hear that thing talk. Evan's hands shook. Project Thanatos. It wasn't just a virus. It was designed to adapt. Jason's face was grim. And now it's hunting us. Silence fell. Then, a single knock on the steel door. Slow. Deliberate. Tap. 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 Jason chambered around. We need to move. Now. They turned and ran. Above them, the city continued to burn. And their time was running out. The underground tunnels stretched before them, damp and suffocating. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, rot. Jason took point, rifle raised, every step measured. Sarah followed, her pistol gripped tight. Evan trailed behind, his breath ragged as his mind replayed the moment over and over. It spoke. Not a growl. Not a mindless shriek. Words. The virus had evolved. And it wanted them to run. How much farther? Jason's voice was low, steady. Evan swallowed the lump in his throat. The tunnels lead to a service exit outside the quarantine zone. If the military hasn't sealed it, we can slip through before the bombs fall. Sarah exhaled. We're betting everything on if. A low growl echoed from the tunnels behind them. Jason whipped around. We don't have a choice. They picked up the pace, boots splashing through stagnant water. The tunnel forked up ahead, left leading deeper underground, right heading toward the exit. Then Evan saw them. Silhouettes in the dim light. Standing still. At least 10 infected blocked the right path. They weren't moving like the usual hordes. Their heads twitched erratically, like they were waiting. Jason cursed. Something's wrong. Evan's blood ran cold. They know. The creatures turned in unison, eyes locking onto them. Then, they charged. Sarah fired first, dropping one. Jason unleashed a burst, but they kept coming, fast, too fast. Evan's mind raced. If they were thinking, could they be distracted? He grabbed a flare from Jason's pack, striking it against the wall. A bright, red glow erupted, casting wild shadows across the tunnel. He threw it to the left tunnel. The creatures hesitated. For a single, precious moment, they stopped. Twitching. Conflicted. Jason grabbed Evan and ran. The hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was enough. They tore past the infected, sprinting toward the service exit. The door was in sight, an old metal hatch, rusted but intact. Sarah yanked the handle. It didn't budge. Help me, she grunted. Jason shouldered his rifle and joined her, forcing the door open inch by inch. Evan stood frozen, heart hammering. Something was coming. From the darkness behind them, the same voice echoed. You can't escape. Evan turned. The thing stood at the end of the tunnel, watching. Then, it smiled. Jason fired a burst. The bullets tore through it, it didn't flinch. The door finally gave way. Go! Jason roared, shoving Evan through first. Sarah scrambled out next. Jason moved to follow. A clawed hand shot out of the darkness and grabbed him. Jason yelled, struggling, as the creature yanked him back. Evan lunged forward. No! Jason's gaze locked onto him. His expression was calm. Then he pulled the pin on a grenade from his vest. Get out! Evan barely had time to react before Sarah grabbed him, dragging him away. The last thing he saw was Jason staring that thing down, lips curling into a smirk. Then... boom! The explosion ripped through the tunnel, fire and debris shooting through the exit as Sarah and Evan were thrown to the ground. Silence. Evan coughed, vision blurred. The tunnel was gone. Jason was gone. Sarah sat up, shaking. We made it. Evan stared at the burning wreckage. We have to make it worth it, he whispered. Above them, the first bombers appeared in the sky. Their time was almost up. Evan and Sarah staggered through the ruined outskirts of the quarantine zone, the distant hum of approaching bombers filling the sky. Smoke curled from the city behind them, thick and choking, blending into the blood-red dawn. Sarah pressed a hand to her ribs, wincing. "Tell me you still have the antivirals." Evan clutched his bag tighter. "They're here. But we're not safe yet. We need to reach the extraction point before." A scream cut through the air. They turned. From the rubble, it emerged. The creature that had hunted them. Its flesh was scorched, its limbs twisted from the explosion, but it wasn't dead. It took one staggering step forward, then another. And it spoke. "You thought this would end?" Evan's blood turned to ice. "It's still alive." Sarah raised her pistol, breath ragged. "Not for long." She fired. The bullet struck its skull, and it kept coming. Evan's mind raced. The virus, it's keeping it alive. It doesn't die like the others. Sarah cursed. "Then what the hell do we do?" Evan looked around frantically, then his gaze locked onto something. A half-buried fuel truck. His heart pounded. "We finish this. For Jason." Sarah understood immediately. She fired at the truck's exposed tank, sending sparks flying. The creature turned, too late. The explosion erupted in a blinding firestorm. The shockwave knocked them off their feet as fire roared through the street, consuming everything. The creature let out an unnatural, ear-piercing screech before being swallowed by the flames. Then, silence. Evan gasped for air. The bombers loomed closer. Sarah coughed, pulling herself up. "We need to move." They ran. Through the smoke and wreckage, they spotted it, the evac chopper. Military personnel stood ready, rifles raised, scanning for survivors. A soldier spotted them. "We've got two. Move, move." They reached the perimeter just as the first bombs dropped. The city trembled, fire blooming in the distance, consuming everything they left behind. Evan collapsed into the chopper, clutching his bag as if it held the world. Sarah leaned back, breathing hard. "We made it." Evan exhaled, staring at the burning city. For now. Because deep down, he knew. The virus wasn't gone. It was just beginning.